Commander Vrixal stood on the bridge of the hegemony flagship Eternal Dominion and watched the tactical display with growing confusion. The battle had been going according to plan just moments ago. The Terran fleet was outnumbered 3-1. Their ships were smaller and carried less firepower. By every calculation the hegemony war computers had made, victory should have been certain within the first hour. That was 6 hours ago. "Commander, the Terrans have destroyed another 3 cruisers," reported his tactical officer, a young Kethri named Suler. His 4 arms moved rapidly across the control interface, but his movements were becoming desperate. "They are using tactics that make no logical sense." Vrixal's mandibles clicked together in frustration. "Explain." "Their ships are not maintaining proper battle formations. They scatter and regroup in random patterns. When we target one vessel, 3 others appear from unexpected vectors. They are using their damaged ships as shields and ramming platforms. One of their destroyers flew directly into the exhaust port of the Righteous Fury and detonated its reactor core from inside the engine housing." "That is suicide," Vrixal said. "The crew evacuated before impact, Commander. They used escape pods to reach a nearby asteroid, then somehow commandeered one of our supply shuttles that was making a delivery run." Vrixal stared at his officer. "They stole our shuttle." "Yes, Commander. They are now using it to broadcast false orders on our communication channels. 17 of our ships have broken formation due to conflicting commands." This was not how wars were supposed to be fought. The hegemony had conquered 47 species across 3 galactic arms. Their military doctrine was perfect. It had been refined over 10,000 years of warfare. Every battle scenario had been calculated and planned for. Every possible enemy tactic had been studied and countered. But the Terrans did not follow any known tactics. On the far side of the battlefield, Captain Sarah Chen sat in the command chair of the TSS Defiant and smiled. Her ship was held together with emergency patches and determination. Half the bridge crew was working from backup stations because the primary consoles had exploded during the last attack run. The coffee maker was broken, which she considered the greatest tragedy of the battle. "Martinez, what's the status of Operation Crazy Ivan?" she asked. Lieutenant Commander Jorge Martinez looked up from his tactical station. He had a bandage wrapped around his head and his left arm was in a sling, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "Ready to execute on your order, Captain. The mining charges are in position on asteroid Delta 7. The hegemony fleet is moving into the kill zone." "And the fake distress signal?" "Broadcasting now. We've got a recording of Ensign Kim doing her best impression of a panicked hegemony officer calling for backup. It's not great, but their translation software seems to be buying it." Chen nodded. 3 hours ago, they had captured a hegemony communication drone and spent 45 minutes figuring out its encryption protocols. Ensign Kim had studied xenolinguistics at the Academy, and while her hegemony standard was described by her professors as having a terrible accent, it was apparently good enough to fool automated systems. "What about the garbage?" Chen asked. "Petty Officer Williams has collected every piece of debris, broken equipment, and literal garbage from the lower decks. He's loaded it into the torpedo tubes along with some spare fusion cores." "Excellent. When we fire, I want the hegemony sensors to read it as a full torpedo spread. The fusion cores should give off enough energy signatures to make them think it's live ordnance." Martinez grinned. "They'll waste their point defense ammunition shooting at our trash." "That's the idea." This was not the way Chen had been taught to fight at the Academy. The official Terran naval doctrine emphasized precision, coordination, and overwhelming force when possible. But the Academy also taught something that no other species in the galaxy seemed to understand. When the rulebook doesn't work, throw it out and make up something new. Humans called it creative problem solving. Their alien allies called it insanity. Their enemies called it terrifying. The hegemony had spent 10,000 years perfecting their military doctrine. They had calculated every possible variable, planned for every contingency, and trained their officers to execute flawless tactical maneuvers. What they had never encountered was an enemy who would stuff garbage into torpedo tubes and call it a strategy. "Captain," called out Ensign Park from the sensor station. "Hegemony flagship is moving. They're trying to reposition to get a clear shot at us." Chen studied the tactical display. The Eternal Dominion was the largest ship in the enemy fleet. It carried enough firepower to crack a planet in half. In a straight fight, the Defiant would last approximately 8 seconds against it. So they weren't going to have a straight fight. "Time to implement Phase 3, Chen announced. "All hands prepare for the Yorktown Shuffle." The Yorktown Shuffle was not in any official manual. It had been invented 3 years ago by the crew of the TSS Yorktown when they found themselves surrounded by pirates in the Kepler Belt. The basic concept was simple. Make the enemy think you're doing one thing while actually doing something completely different. Then, when they commit to countering what they think you're doing, hit them with what you're actually doing. The complicated part was that the Yorktown Shuffle required perfect timing, complete trust between crew members, and a willingness to do things that looked absolutely stupid from the outside. "Engineering, cut main power on my mark," Chen ordered. "Captain," Chief Engineer Thompson's voice came over the intercom. "You want me to cut power in the middle of a battle?" "Just for 30 seconds. I want to look dead in the water." There was a pause. "Understood, Captain. Ready on your mark." Chen watched the tactical display. The Hegemony flagship was moving into position. Its main cannon was charging. In approximately 2 minutes, it would have a perfect firing solution on the Defiant. "Now," Chen said. The lights went out. The engines died. The Defiant went dark and began to drift. On the Hegemony flagship, Commander Vrixal watched the Terran vessel go silent. "Did we hit them?" "No, Commander. No weapons fired. They simply stopped." "Is it a trick?" Suler consulted his instruments. "All readings indicate the vessel is disabled. No power signatures, no engine activity, no weapons charging. They appear to be completely dead." Vrixal's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. In 10,000 years of hegemony warfare, no enemy had ever simply shut down in the middle of a battle. It made no tactical sense. A disabled ship was a target. Any competent commander would maintain power to shields and weapons until the very end. "It must be a malfunction," he decided. "Their primitive technology has failed them. Move in for the kill, target their reactor core and destroy them." The Eternal Dominion began to move closer. Its point defense systems powered down slightly because there was no perceived threat from a dead ship. Its shields focused forward toward the approaching Terran reinforcements, leaving the port side slightly weaker. Exactly as Captain Chen had planned. On the Defiant, the crew waited in darkness. Emergency lights provided dim illumination. Life support was running on batteries. Every system that could be shut down had been shut down to make the ship look as dead as possible. Chen counted silently in her head. 10, 20, 30. "Now, Thompson." The lights came back on. The engines roared to life. Every weapon system on the Defiant activated simultaneously. And the ship fired everything it had directly into the weakened port shields of the Hegemony flagship. The Eternal Dominion shuddered under the unexpected assault. Alarms screamed across its bridge. Commander Vrixal grabbed his command chair as the deck pitched beneath him. "What is happening?" he demanded. "The Terran ship was playing dead, Commander. They're firing on us. Shields are down to 60% on the port side." Impossible. No commander would deliberately disable their own ship in combat. But a Terran commander would. And that was exactly the problem the Hegemony was beginning to understand. The battle continued for another 2 hours. Captain Chen and her crew executed 17 different improvised tactics during that time. They used the debris from destroyed ships as cover. They reprogrammed their navigation beacon to emit false sensor readings. They even launched a maintenance drone carrying a nuclear warhead directly into the engine intake of a hegemony battlecruiser. Petty Officer Williams, who had originally been assigned to sanitation duties before the battle, became the ship's unofficial demolitions expert. He had discovered that combining cleaning chemicals from the supply closet with certain components from broken equipment could create very effective improvised explosives. When asked where he learned this skill, he simply said that he had grown up in Detroit. Meanwhile, across the battlefield, the other Terran ships were having similar experiences. The TSS Relentless had run out of torpedoes 2 hours ago and was now ramming hegemony fighters with its reinforced hull. The TSS Harmony, a science vessel that was never designed for combat, had reconfigured its research sensors to blind enemy targeting systems. The TSS John McClane, named after some ancient Terran hero, had somehow managed to board 3 enemy vessels and was currently flying a captured hegemony destroyer against its former allies. Admiral Kowalski watched the battle from her command ship, the TSS Independence. She had been in the Terran Navy for 40 years and had fought in 12 major engagements. She had never seen anything quite like this. "Admiral," her communications officer said, "Captain Chen is requesting permission to implement something she's calling Operation Falling Piano." "What does that involve?" "Apparently, she wants to use our tractor beams to drop asteroids on the enemy fleet." Kowalski considered this for a moment. It was completely insane. It violated at least 6 sections of the Naval Combat Manual. It would require perfect coordination between multiple ships and had a high probability of failure. "Permission granted," she said, "and tell Captain Chen that if this works, drinks are on me." Far across the stars, the Galactic Council was receiving reports of the battle. The Council consisted of representatives from the 12 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. They had been observing the war between the Terran Federation and the hegemony with growing concern. "The Terrans continue to hold their position," observed Ambassador Threll of the Venn Collective. "This should not be possible. Their fleet is inferior in every measurable way." "They do not fight like any species we have studied," agreed Counselor Yaxian of the Preserved Unity. "Their tactics appear random, chaotic, yet somehow effective." "It is not random," said Ambassador Kellys of the Mindari Empire. Kellys was ancient, even by Mindari standards. She had observed hundreds of conflicts over her lifetime. "I have been studying the Terrans since they first achieved interstellar travel. What you call chaos is actually something far more dangerous." "What do you mean?" asked Threll. "The Terrans practice something they call creative problem solving. When confronted with a challenge, they do not simply apply existing solutions. They invent new ones. They adapt. They improvise. They take things apart and put them back together in new ways. It is a form of mental flexibility that most species lose after childhood." "But that is inefficient," Yaxian protested. "Proven methods exist for a reason. Why waste resources developing new approaches when established doctrine has already been optimized?" Kellys made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is exactly what the hegemony thought. They have spent 10,000 years perfecting their military doctrine. Every battle scenario has been calculated. Every tactic has been optimized. But they have never faced an enemy who refuses to follow the rules. The Terrans look at a problem and ask not what should work, but what could work. They see possibilities where others see limitations." "That sounds like madness," Threll said. "Perhaps, but it is madness that wins wars." Back on the battlefield, Operation Falling Piano was underway. 3 Terran cruisers had locked their tractor beams onto a small asteroid and were dragging it toward the hegemony fleet. The asteroid was about 200 meters across, roughly the size of a hegemony destroyer. Commander Vrixal watched this development with complete bewilderment. They are throwing rocks at us. It appears so, Commander. That is the most primitive tactic I have ever seen. We developed beyond such methods 8,000 years ago. Yes, Commander, but the rock is moving very fast, and our point defense systems are designed to track powered vessels and missiles, not unpowered debris. Vrixal realized the problem a moment too late. The asteroid struck the cruiser Vigilant Guardian amidships and tore it in half. The explosion destroyed 2 nearby frigates and damaged 3 more. This is absurd, Vrixal muttered. They are fighting us with rocks and garbage and tricks. Where is their honor? Where is their discipline? I believe, Commander, that they would say they are fighting to win. That was the fundamental difference that Vrixal was only now beginning to understand. The hegemony fought according to rules. Honor demanded that battles be conducted in certain ways. Doctrine required specific responses to specific situations. Victory was achieved through superior execution of established principles. The Terrans did not care about any of that. They only cared about winning, and they would do whatever it took to achieve that goal. On the Defiant, Captain Chen was facing a new problem. The ship was running low on everything. Ammunition was at 12%. Fuel reserves were down to 30%. The coffee maker was still broken, and the crew was starting to get irritable. Martinez, what do we have left in the way of weapons? She asked. The tactical officer consulted his display. 4 torpedoes, about 200 rounds for the point defense guns, and whatever Petty Officer Williams can make in engineering. What about the mining charges from Operation Crazy Ivan? We used those on the asteroid drop, but Williams says he can probably make more if we can find the right materials. Chen nodded. This was the reality of fighting outnumbered. You ran out of conventional options quickly and had to get creative. Fortunately, creativity was something humans had in abundance. What about the hegemony ships we disabled but didn't destroy? She asked. Martinez checked. There are 3 hegemony frigates drifting without power about 40 kilometers from our position. Why? I want boarding parties on those ships. Let's see if we can get them running and use them against their friends. Captain, our Marines are already spread thin from the previous boarding actions. Then we'll use whoever we have. Get me volunteers from every department, anyone who can hold a weapon and follow orders. 30 minutes later, 3 improvised boarding parties were crossing the void between the Defiant and the disabled hegemony frigates. They were equipped with whatever weapons could be spared and protected by emergency EVA suits that had seen better days. Among them were 2 cooks, a medical technician, 3 engineers, and the ship's chaplain, who had explained that the religious texts of his faith said nothing against shooting aliens in self-defense. Lieutenant Sarah Park led the team approaching the first frigate. She was normally the ship's navigator, but she had qualified as a small arms expert during her academy days. Her team consisted of Petty Officer Williams, 2 engineers named Chen and Domings, and Ensign Kim from Communications. Remember, Park said over the radio, we want to capture these ships intact if possible. Disable the crew, don't destroy the equipment. How are we supposed to disable them? Domings asked. We don't even know what their crew looks like. We'll figure it out when we get there. That's what we do. The boarding ramp deployed, and the team entered the disabled frigate. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the corridors. The ship was silent except for the distant hum of backup systems. They encountered their first hegemony crew member around the 3rd corner. The alien was about 2 meters tall, covered in hard plates like a crab, with 4 arms and mandibles that clicked nervously when it saw them. It was holding something that might have been a weapon or might have been a communication device. For a long moment, both sides stared at each other. Then Petty Officer Williams raised his improvised stun grenade and threw it directly at the alien's feet. The device went off with a blinding flash and a loud bang. The alien collapsed, twitching. Did that actually work? Kim asked, surprised. Apparently, Williams said. I mixed it up from some cleaning supplies and spare parts. Wasn't sure if it would affect their biology. Nice work, Park said. Keep moving. They cleared the ship deck by deck, using a combination of improvised weapons, creative tactics, and pure audacity. Williams's homemade stun grenades worked on about 70% of the crew. The other 30% were subdued through more direct means, including one memorable incident where Ensign Kim convinced a hegemony officer that he was surrounded by invisible Terran assassins and should surrender immediately. Within an hour, all 3 frigates had been captured. Their crews were secured in cargo holds. Their systems were being reactivated by Terran engineers who had never seen hegemony technology before but were determined to make it work anyway. Captain Chen, Park reported, we have control of 3 hegemony frigates. Their weapons and shields are operational. We're still figuring out the propulsion systems, but we should have basic maneuverability within the hour. Chen smiled. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. Once you're mobile, I want you to join the main engagement. Let's see how the hegemony likes fighting their own ships. Commander Vrixal's confusion had evolved into something closer to panic. His fleet had lost 47 ships. The Terrans had lost 18. By any rational calculation, this battle should have been decided hours ago. Instead, the hegemony was losing. And now, his sensors were detecting 3 of his own frigates turning against the fleet. Commander, Suler reported, his voice strained. The frigate's Righteous Path, Duty's Call, and Eternal Service have been captured by the enemy. They are now engaging our forces. How is this possible? Those ships should have self-destruct protocols to prevent capture. The Terrans appear to have disabled those protocols, Commander. That should take days of specialized work. Apparently not for Terrans. Vrixal watched his tactical display as the captured frigates opened fire on a hegemony cruiser. The cruiser's shields held, but just barely. The captain of that cruiser was probably experiencing the same confusion felt. How do you fight an enemy who steals your own weapons and uses them against you? Commander, Suler said, I have completed an analysis of Terran tactical patterns, or rather the lack thereof. Report. The Terrans do not appear to follow any established military doctrine. Each ship operates independently, making decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than predetermined plans. They share information and coordinate loosely, but individual commanders have complete freedom to improvise. That is chaos. It cannot possibly be effective. And yet it is, Commander. Our doctrine is based on predictability. We anticipate enemy actions and prepare appropriate responses. But the Terrans cannot be anticipated. They do things that make no logical sense until after they do them. By then, it is too late to respond. Vrixal considered this. The hegemony had always won through superior organization and planning. Their fleets moved like a single organism, each part knowing exactly what the others would do. It was efficient. It was elegant. It was apparently vulnerable to an enemy who refused to play by the rules. What do you recommend? Vrixal asked. Suler hesitated. I recommend retreat, Commander. We cannot win this battle through conventional means. We need to withdraw and develop new strategies that account for Terran unpredictability. Retreat. In 10,000 years of hegemony warfare, retreat was considered the ultimate disgrace. But as Vrixal watched another cruiser fall to the impossible tactics of the Terran fleet, he realized that disgrace was preferable to annihilation. Signal the fleet, he ordered. We are withdrawing. All ships are to fall back to the secondary rally point. The hegemony fleet began to pull back. Their movements were orderly and professional, each ship covering the others as they retreated. It was a textbook withdrawal, executed perfectly. Captain Chen watched them go. Should we pursue? Martinez asked. No, we're too damaged to press the advantage. Let them run. We'll rearm, repair, and be ready when they come back. Do you think they'll come back? Chen nodded. They'll come back, but next time they'll be prepared for our tricks. We'll have to come up with new ones. That was the thing about creative problem solving. It wasn't a one-time solution. It was an ongoing process. Every problem solved created new problems that required new solutions. The Terrans had learned this lesson over millennia of wars, conflicts, and challenges. Adaptation wasn't just a strategy. It was a way of life. The news of the Battle of Kepler's Gate spread across the galaxy within hours. A hegemony fleet of over 100 ships had been defeated by a Terran force of less than 40. The casualty ratios were almost unbelievable. Hegemony losses: 63 ships destroyed, 12 captured. Terran losses: 21 ships destroyed, 8 damaged beyond immediate repair. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the implications. "This changes everything," Ambassador Threll said. "The hegemony has not suffered a defeat of this magnitude in 3,000 years. "The Terrans are more dangerous than we realized," agreed Counselor Yaxian. "We must reconsider our neutrality." "The question is not whether to choose sides," Ambassador Kelly said. "The question is what we can learn from this." "What do you mean?" "The Terrans did not win because of superior numbers or technology. They won because of how they think. Their minds work differently from ours. They see options where we see limitations. They create solutions where we see only problems." "Can this be taught?" Threll asked. "Can our species learn to think like Terrans?" Kelly's was silent for a long moment. "I do not know. Our cultures have evolved over millions of years to value stability, tradition, and proven methods. The Terrans value innovation, adaptation, and what they call thinking outside the box. These are fundamentally different approaches to existence." "Then perhaps we should study them further, send observers to their worlds, learn their ways." "That may be wise, but be warned. The Terran approach to problem solving is not comfortable. It requires questioning everything, including your most basic assumptions. It requires accepting that what has always worked might not always work. It requires being willing to fail repeatedly in pursuit of new solutions." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it is also how the Terrans have survived. They come from a world that tried to kill them for 4 billion years. Every generation faced new challenges. Every generation had to find new solutions. Creative problem solving is not just something they do. It is who they are." Far from the grand chambers of the Galactic Council, Captain Chen was sitting in a makeshift bar that the crew had set up in Cargo Bay 3. The Defiant was limping toward the nearest repair station, held together by emergency patches and the determination of her crew. Around her, the survivors of the battle were drinking, laughing, and sharing stories of the impossible things they had done. Lieutenant Martinez was explaining how he had reprogrammed a cleaning robot to carry explosives into the ventilation system of a hegemony cruiser. Petty Officer Williams was showing off his collection of improvised weapons to a group of impressed engineers. Ensign Kim was teaching the ship's chaplain how to curse in hegemony standard. Admiral Kowalski arrived via shuttle to personally congratulate the crew. She moved through the cargo bay, shaking hands and patting shoulders, until she reached Captain Chen. "That was some impressive work out there," the Admiral said, accepting a drink that someone pressed into her hand. "Operation Falling Piano alone will be studied at the Academy for years." Chen shrugged. "We did what we had to do." "You did more than that. You improvised solutions that our best tacticians couldn't have imagined. You turned garbage into weapons and captured ships into allies. You broke every rule in the book and won anyway." "With respect, Admiral, the rules are just guidelines. When the situation changes, the rules have to change too." Kowalski nodded. "That's exactly what I told the Joint Chiefs when they asked how a fleet of 40 ships held off a force of 100. Do you know what they said?" "What?" "They said they're going to update the training curriculum. Every officer candidate is going to learn about the Battle of Kepler's Gate, not just the tactics but the thinking behind them, how to adapt, how to improvise, how to solve problems that don't have established solutions. Chen looked around at her crew. They were tired, battered, and running on caffeine and adrenaline. They had lost friends today. They had done things that would give them nightmares for years, but they had survived and they had won. "The hegemony will be back," Chen said. "They'll study what we did and develop countermeasures." "I know. And when they do, we'll have to come up with something new." "I know that too," Kowalski smiled. "That's what Terrans do." The war with the hegemony would continue for another 3 years. Both sides would win battles and lose them. New tactics would be developed and countered. Alliances would shift and reform. But the lesson of Kepler's Gate would never be forgotten. Not by the Terrans, who already knew it. Not by the hegemony, who had learned it through painful experience. And not by the rest of the galaxy, who watched with growing fascination as a species that had only discovered interstellar travel a century ago held its own against an empire that had ruled for 10 millennia. Creative problem solving. That's what the Terrans called it. The ability to look at a situation, understand its constraints, and then find a way around them. To see not just what is, but what could be. To never accept defeat simply because the odds said you should lose. It was perhaps the most Terran trait of all. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler's Gate, the Galactic Council made an unprecedented decision. They invited the Terran Federation to send an observer to their sessions. It was not full membership, which required centuries of demonstrated stability, but it was an acknowledgement that the young species had earned their attention. The Terrans sent Ambassador Elizabeth Okonkwo, a woman who had spent 30 years in diplomatic service and was known for her unconventional approaches to negotiation. In her first week on the council station, she had reorganized the diplomatic filing system, suggested improvements to the food dispensers that the station's maintenance crew had been trying to fix for decades, and convinced 2 long hostile species to resolve their territorial dispute through a competitive cooking competition. "She is remarkable," Ambassador Kellys told her colleagues. "I asked her how she came up with the idea for the cooking competition. She said it came to her while she was watching old entertainment files from Earth. Apparently, Terrans used to resolve conflicts through competitive food preparation quite often." "That is absurd," Counselor Yaxian said. "Territorial disputes should be resolved through traditional methods. Arbitration, treaty negotiation, or, if necessary, measured military action." And yet the dispute between the Krell and the Vorathi had resisted those methods for 300 years. Ambassador Okonkwo solved it in a week. The Terrans continued to surprise the galaxy. Their ships kept appearing in unexpected places, doing unexpected things. A Terran exploration vessel discovered a new method of faster-than-light travel by accidentally flying through a collapsing star. A Terran engineering team figured out how to improve the efficiency of standard galactic power generators by 20% because they thought the established design was too complicated. A Terran musician created a new form of art by combining sounds in ways that other species found physically uncomfortable but strangely compelling. And the war with the hegemony continued. Commander Vrixal had been demoted after the Battle of Kepler's Gate. He now served as a tactical advisor, teaching younger officers about what he had learned from fighting the Terrans. His lessons were unconventional by hegemony standards. "Forget everything you know about warfare," he would tell his students. "The Terrans do not fight the way we do. They do not follow rules. They do not respect tradition. They look at every situation as a new problem requiring a new solution." "How do we counter this?" his students would ask. "I do not know if we can, but we can learn from it. We can become more flexible in our thinking. We can question our assumptions. We can remember that doctrine is a tool, not a religion." These were dangerous ideas in the hegemony. They challenged 10,000 years of military tradition. They suggested that the perfect doctrine might not be perfect after all, but after Kepler's gate, the old ways were harder to defend. The Hegemony High Command eventually approved a new experimental unit. It was made up of officers who had survived battles against the Terrans and learned from them. They were given freedom to develop their own tactics, to improvise, to think creatively. It was a small step, but it was a step. The war reached a turning point at the Battle of the Void Nebula. Both sides had gathered their largest fleets for what was expected to be the decisive engagement. Hegemony forces numbered over 300 ships. Terran forces numbered 180. Admiral Kowalski commanded the Terran fleet from the TSS Independence. Captain Chen, now promoted and in command of the new battlecruiser TSS Perseverance, led the vanguard. The battle began according to Hegemony predictions. They had studied Terran tactics extensively and prepared countermeasures for every improvised strategy they had observed. When the Terrans attempted the Yorktown Shuffle, the Hegemony was ready. When they tried Operation Falling Piano, the Hegemony point defense systems had been reprogrammed to track unpowered debris. For the first time in the war, the Hegemony was adapting faster than the Terrans. "They're learning," Admiral Kowalski observed as another trick failed. "Our old strategies aren't working anymore." "Then we need new ones," Captain Chen replied. "That's what we do." But what could they do? The Hegemony had prepared for everything. Every trick, every trap, every improvised tactic. They had learned from their defeats and evolved their doctrine. Chen studied the tactical display. The enemy fleet was positioned perfectly. Their formations were impeccable. Their coordination was flawless. By every measure, they were going to win this battle. And then she saw it. "Admiral, I have an idea." "I'm listening." "The Hegemony has learned to counter our chaos. They've adapted to our unpredictability. So what if we give them something they've never seen before?" "What's that?" "Order." There was silence on the command channel. Then Admiral Kowalski laughed. "Chen, you magnificent lunatic. You want to beat the Hegemony by out-hegemonying the Hegemony." "Exactly. They've prepared for creative problem-solving. They've trained to handle our improvisation. They're ready for chaos. But they've never seen a Terran fleet fight with perfect discipline and coordination. It's the last thing they'll expect." The plan spread across the Terran fleet. For the first time in the war, they would follow a strict battle plan. No improvisation, no creative tactics, just textbook military doctrine executed with perfect precision. The Hegemony commanders watched in confusion as the Terran fleet reformed into standard battle formations. They had been prepared for tricks, for deception, for the unpredictable madness they had come to expect from humanity. This was something else entirely. "What are they doing?" asked the Hegemony Admiral. "They appear to be forming a standard combat line, Admiral." "It must be a trick, some new form of deception." "Scans show no anomalies. Their formation is textbook. Their power readings are consistent. They are doing exactly what they appear to be doing." The Hegemony fleet hesitated. They had prepared for chaos. They had trained to handle unpredictability, but they had no protocols for handling an enemy who suddenly started following the rules. It was, perhaps, the most creative tactic of all. The Battle of the Void Nebula lasted 18 hours. Both sides fought with everything they had. Ships burned and exploded. Lives were lost. Heroes were made and forgotten. In the end, neither side achieved a decisive victory. Both fleets withdrew to lick their wounds and prepare for the next engagement. But something had changed. The Hegemony High Command looked at the battle reports and saw something that terrified them. The Terrans had proven that they could fight any way they chose. Chaotic or ordered, creative or disciplined, predictable or impossible to anticipate. They had adapted not just their tactics, but their entire approach to warfare based on what the situation required. This was not an enemy that could be defeated by studying their methods. Every time you prepared for what they did last time, they would do something different. They were not limited by doctrine or tradition or any fixed way of thinking. They are impossible to predict, the Hegemony Admiral reported to the High Council, because they can be anything. They can fight like us or fight like madmen. They can follow rules or break them. They have no permanent style, only permanent adaptability. Then what do you recommend? The Admiral was silent for a long moment. I recommend peace. The peace negotiations took another year. Ambassador Okonkwo led the Terran delegation, and she approached the negotiations the same way Terrans approached everything else, by looking for creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. The final treaty was unconventional by galactic standards. Instead of simple territorial divisions and reparations, it established something new. A joint research initiative where hegemony precision and Terran creativity could work together. A cultural exchange program where young members of each species could learn from the other. A framework for cooperation instead of competition. This is not a traditional peace treaty, Counselor Yaxian observed when the treaty was presented to the Galactic Council. No, Ambassador Kellys agreed. It is something better. It is an attempt to learn from each other instead of destroying each other. Do you think it will last? I think it has a better chance than any treaty I have seen in my lifetime, because both sides truly want it to work. The hegemony has learned that their ancient ways are not perfect. The Terrans have proven that adaptation is more powerful than tradition. Together, they might create something new. Captain Sarah Chen attended the signing ceremony as a representative of the Terran military. She stood in the Great Hall of the Council Station, surrounded by representatives of a dozen species, and watched as the war officially ended. Afterward, she found herself standing next to Commander Vrixal. He had been part of the hegemony delegation, representing the reformed military that was slowly learning new ways of thinking. Your people are remarkable, Vrixal said. I have spent 2 years studying your methods. I still do not fully understand how you think. Neither do we sometimes, Chen admitted. We just see problems and look for solutions. Any solutions. We don't let tradition or doctrine limit what we consider possible. How did you develop this ability? Is it something inherent to your species? Chen thought about this. I think it comes from our history. Humans spent most of our existence just trying to survive. We faced ice ages, plagues, famines, wars. Every generation had to solve problems that the previous generation couldn't have imagined. So we learned to think flexibly. We learned that the old ways might not work for new challenges. We have existed for far longer than your species. Why did we not learn this? Maybe because you were too successful. You conquered your early challenges so thoroughly that you never had to question your methods. Your doctrine worked, so you never needed to develop new doctrine. We never had that luxury. For us, adaptation was survival. Vrixal considered this. Perhaps that is why your species is so dangerous. You have been shaped by 10,000 generations of creative problem solving. It is not just something you do. It is what you are. Maybe, but I prefer to think of it as hope. Hope. We believe that no matter how bad things get, there's always a way forward. Maybe not an easy way, maybe not an obvious way, but some way. We refuse to accept that any problem is truly unsolvable. And that belief, that stubborn refusal to give up, that's what drives us to find new solutions when the old ones fail. The treaty held. The joint research initiatives produced remarkable advances in science and technology. The cultural exchange programs helped both species understand each other in ways that war never could. And across the galaxy, other civilizations watched and learned. The Terran approach to problem solving spread slowly but surely. Young minds from a dozen species began asking new questions, challenging old assumptions, looking for creative solutions to ancient problems. It was not a revolution. It was an evolution, a gradual shift in how the galaxy thought about challenges and solutions. And it had started because one small species from an unremarkable planet had looked at an impossible situation and refused to accept that it was impossible. That was the legacy of the Terran warriors, not just their victories, but their way of thinking. The belief that any problem could be solved with enough creativity, determination, and willingness to try something new. Creative problem solving. In the end, it changed everything.